All right, so today we're going to be started on building sort of one of the final rigs that we're going to be looking at for the rest of class. We're going to sort of build this slowly and meticulously and make sure all of our I's are dotted and all of our T's are crossed. And I'll give you this geometry. It should be available via Blackboard for you all to access. And we'll be basically today laying out a spine and setting up some controls for it to sort of lay the basis and set some good habits as you begin to rig and create your skeletons and build controls for your meshes as you go forward. But we're going to be breaking this down, like this very large and sort of daunting task, into a lot more manageable and bite-sized parts, right? Because enabled to or by doing so, we're able to make things a lot more approachable and sort of give ourselves a checklist on how to build this rig and give ourselves a sense of progress as we begin to finish doing that out. So today, like I said, we're going to be laying out a spine and building some controls. I'm going to be going over some basic organization, especially like naming conventions. Then we're going to lay out some of our joints, just our spine. We'll clean them up and get them oriented correctly after we adjust them with D. And then we'll start building some curves that we can use to basically use those as drivers or as controls for our spine. Because in previous examples in our class, like with our bony rig, we just grabbed the spine bones and rotated them. But this time we'll try and build some controls for them so it's a little bit easier to do so. And we have a very specific way that we want to go about this that I have here written down. And we'll be following this to a T because this order is important. I want to make sure you get all of these things done as you begin to lay out your spine and get those done in the correct order. So we'll be using some different tools. A lot of this should be fairly familiar at this point. It's just a different application of what we've been working on to a much more realistic rig. So the first thing I'm going to do is get some display layers set up. This just allows us to look at our geometry and either hide it easily or make it so we can't touch it or mess with it. Because we have our like girl geo group over here, right? So we can take this geometry and we can sequester it away and basically organize it and make it a lot easier for us to actually work with our rig. So I'll just grab this group, and with my rigging tab, I'll use select hierarchy to grab everything to make sure I just have everything that I want to organize. And over not in your like modeling toolkit or your attribute editor, let me go to my classic. This might be a little easier for me. You want to be over here in your channel box layer editor, and we're looking for our display layers. This little piece of paper with a blue circle on it that adds selected objects to a new layer. We'll just click that and bump it in, and immediately we can already toggle this on and off, right? So I'm going to rename this layer just so we know what it is. And I'm going to follow similar naming conventions to what I received my mesh in, or at least just stick with a similar rule so that when not only you look through your project, but when other people, either it being me to grade it, or if you're working on a project to collaborate with other people, you want to name it in a way that makes sense and follows sort of a general set of rules. So what I'll call this is basically girl underscore geo underscore capital LYR, basically an abbreviation for layer. And I'm liking that name because it's similar to how we have our geo and our group named, and I'll just save this out to make sure that everything is working. It's copacetic. So a little overview of what's going on in our display layers, right? We have this V for visibility, so if we toggle this on and off, we can basically hide all of our meshes pretty easily with one click. This P here is for playback. We're not going to basically check that, but it basically means during playback it'll vanish. But I'll keep that on because there's no need. And then we either have this toggle here for T for template or transparent. So we can see the wireframe, but that's about it. And we hit R for restricted. Basically means we can't select the mesh on this layer. We can still select surface objects, right? So if I jumped in some geometry, I couldn't select her, but I could select this cube if I wanted to. So we'll leave it on restricted for now so we can see our model and work with our model, but we won't actually run into any issues by grabbing the mesh and geometry and messing anything up that way. So that's what the display layer is for. As we go forward, we might build one for our bones and for our control curves. But for the time being, for today, we'll just use this girl geo layer to get everything lined up. So let's go ahead and do what we've done like on our bony rig and begin to lay out a spine. We're going to make a root, I think probably 3 mid spines, and then go up to a neck and all the way up to and through her head. And previously we had worked on the front orthographic, and while that's fine, we'll actually work on the side today to get things lined up symmetrically. So I just wanted you to know how to align bones previously, straight down the center. But if we place things over here on the side as well, our bones should, in theory, be dead center of our mesh. So let's go ahead and get started with that layout. Again, make sure your X-ray joints is toggled on so you can see them as you place them. I'll go up here to my rigging shelf tab, grab my create joint tool as is usual, and I'll probably increase my short bone radius because it was pretty small for the bony rig. What does 0.5 look like? Still a little small. Why don't we go up to just 1? Yeah, I can deal with that. So I'll set my short bone radius to 1, and let's begin to lay out our spine. We'll be putting our root pretty much smack dab in the middle of the mesh in sort of the center of the pelvis. So I'm going to try right around here for my root, and we will rename that root in a moment, but let's keep trucking and sort of follow this spine in a vague S-curve to get all the way up through the neck into the head. And again, like, we want to be sort of respecting our anatomy. We're going to keep it simplistic. Like, we don't have to build all vertebra of the spine, but we want to, again, like, respect that shape and think about anatomy as we're building our rigs. So I'll just go ahead and drop these down. So here I have my lower spine. Let's go up maybe here for a mid spine. Maybe shoot this up here for my upper spine. So I'm sort of following that S curve, right? Put this to the base of the head for my neck, and I actually want to go all the way up here, up through the top, to the sort of the crown of her scalp to place my head joint, right? So we sort of have that curve going on that generally respects the flow of our spine. I again want to put that head joint up there for later. It's going to be useful for us, but if you don't know why, we're at least just going to put it there for now, just to make sure everything's looking good. So now those are laid out. Let's go double check here in the front. And this is wireframe shaded for whatever reason. It's because this little cube is ticked on. And if we look here, everything is already aligned down the center. Everything is looking good, straight down the middle. So again, you can either align it by putting down the joints in the front and using X to snap to the grid, or you can instead just go to the side and lay them out that way, so they'll just be on that line of symmetry. So I'll go back in here for now. I'll turn on my X-ray to make sure everything looks okay. And I'm feeling decent about that layout, so I'll keep it as is for now. And let's rename our joints. So this very first one we want to name root. Let's see here, 2, 3, and 4 are all going to be spines, so I'll select those with Shift Select, grabbing joint 2 first, and all the way down to 4, and I'll use my joint rename tool to do spine. Down the rename a number, the start number set to 1, punch that, and everything's been renamed to spine. Next one up, I'll make this my neck joint, and then up at the tippy top, her head joint. Cool. Now that that's done, of course, this would now be the time to readjust your bones in this hierarchy before we begin orienting things. So if I wanted this to be back a little bit, I'd select it and hit D as in dog on my keyboard to scoot it back by just grabbing the pivot using my move tool to do so. I'm actually okay with that. I might scoot this spine one forward just a little bit. It's not just right up against her back. But I'm mostly okay with these layouts, so I'm just going to go ahead and stick with this for now. But again, this would be a great place to adjust this layout first, because we're going to start building some controls for it. And we want those to be oriented right the first time and not adjust it, because things will start to get weird and you'll have a difficult time getting your rig to function 100% properly if that is the case. So let's go ahead and orient our joints to get things cleaned up. So in typical fashion, I'll go ahead and grab my root, use my select hierarchy button from the scripts that we've run, and let's view our rotation axes just for now. And oof, yeah, this is all kind of a mess. Our X's are pointing at the next bone, which is what we want, but our Y's are not pointing the right way. So again, we want all of our Y's to be pointed forward on our model, have them all being the same way so that when this rotates, it rotates in the same behavior. So I'll go up here to grab joint orient, open this tool, use my aim axis X, my up axis to Y, set my world direction to positive Y, and let's orient our joints. So sort of same deal. I have a couple pointed forward, but most of them are backwards, so I at least know that this is correct in that I can just reverse this as is, and I'll select each individual bone that I want to flip. So I'll just grab this bone, run orient joint, now my Y is forward, same for the neck, or I guess that'd be spine 3, then the neck, all the way up to the head. All right, so yeah, again, we want this orientation to be with the Y's pointing forward for the sake of having the rotation all be similar on our model, because if we want to rotate multiple parts of the spine, they might conflict if they're not oriented properly. So that's looking good. We're not going to do the arms or hands at all yet. I just want to lay this spine out and get some controls for it to sort of show and demo the basis of how we're going to be working on this rig for the rest of the semester. So I'll just single click this again. I want my rotation axes to be banished since I don't need them anymore. I'll select the hierarchy. I can use my rotax button, but comet joint orient also comes with a show or hide axis. So I'll hit the hide axis button. And again, you can show or hide axis with comet too. Just a handful of ways to show that rotation axes and make sure your bones are looking pretty good. All right, with that done, I'll close comet joint orient because I shouldn't need this anymore. And let's begin on building our controls. So this is where our control curves script comes in handy. I want there to be sort of a 4 arrow situation for the root control. We're going to be building that root control first and working our way up. We'll also be using our display layers to help us make that job a little bit easier. But for the time being, let's go ahead and click up here on our rigging shelf, that curve script that we've made before. And I'm looking for just 4 arrows. So I scroll on a little bit, I found 4 arrows. And I do want this to be smack dab in the middle of the world, so I'm going to choose origin as a spawn point, but this is tiny. I don't want it to be tiny. So I'm just going to scale it up, grab it and push it up into an appropriate size. So if I were an animator, I think this would be an appropriate size, maybe just a little bit bigger so it surrounds her feet. So that's good. I like that. But we don't want to have any transformations in here. Again, in sort of up and coming with the idea of that we need to have 0 transformation so it doesn't mess up our bones, that also applies to our root curves, even more so, I would argue. So I'll go up to modify and over to freeze transformations to get those back to how they're supposed to be once I have this scaled and placed where I need it to be. I didn't move it through the world at all because I think it being on the floor, because her feet are also on the floor, right? Because it's not really going any lower than that. So I think that's an appropriate place, and I'll leave it there. Next, I want to rename this curve, right? So I actually know what it is, and we're going to be building like a sort of a hierarchy that mimics what our joint system is doing to build some controls. So I'll just double click on this and rename this to root underscore CTL. And again, sort of going in with those naming conventions, I have underscore CTL to mean control. So that way we sort of understand what's going on. And if we stick to this convention right, if I want to find all of my controls in the outliner, I can type in CTL and just all of my controls would show up. So that's another reason why you might want to use that. We'll probably even add like JNT or joints later to our skeleton so we can do something similar. But for now, we'll just use this curve. So I've renamed it. I also want to put it in a group to hold those certain transforms. And again, this grouping tactic that I'm going to show you is very important. And as we build our rigs throughout the rest of the semester, you really need to be looking for, again, that daisy chain or that stair-step shape in your hierarchy. And we're going to be sort of alternating what is parented to what. And once we start getting into it, I'll show you that specifically. But again, I just want to put that in your mind for now, is that that's what we're going to be looking for, is that daisy chain or that stair-stepping. So that hierarchy order is going to be very important for building our controls as we go on later. For the time being now, I have this, and I'll make a group for it. So I can either go up to create, and then I want to find empty group, or in this case, I'll just save some clicks and hit Control-G on my keyboard. It'd be Command-G if you're on Mac. So I'll open this up just so I can see what's going on underneath there. And I want this group to be named very similarly. So I'll just make this root underscore CTL lowercase, because it is the group for the control, but then I'll underscore capital GRP, group for short. In doing so, we're able to begin setting our organization structure up. Again, if we click on this, there are no transforms here in our channel box. Same goes for our root control. So that's what we're hoping to get. So now that we actually have this control, we do want it to drive our root, but we don't want to use the parenting like in the hierarchy, right? Because we could drag this middle mouse or use parenting to grab this and move this, but this might cause problems for us later, especially once we set up some of these other controls, and it'll get a little complex. So we'll instead use a parent constraint. So that's the other type of connection that we were talking about aside from like our different editors, right? So there's parenting, there's the editors, and then there's constraints. And we're going to be using a lot of constraints today and for the rest of the class. So you're going to want to get used to doing this to get different things linked up. And I don't even want to see this for now. Just to test this, I might just turn off the visibility layer so we can just get right in here and do what we need to. So I want to use that mnemonic device. The parent constrains the child, right? Oh, and do make sure your menu sets are set to rigging, because that's how you can access constraints. But parent constrains the child, right? So I want to single click on my root control, hold shift to grab the root bone. So we grab the parent first and the child last. Then I'll go up to constrain, over to parent, and I'll look at this box real quick just to make sure everything is what it needs to be. So yeah, the big thing here is to note that maintain offset is checked on, because if it's not, now our spine layout is instantly ruined. So I'm going to undo that, make sure maintain offset is checked, hit add so my window vanishes, and it looks like this is constrained. So if I click on my root curve, change to my move tool, and wiggle it around, now my spine should move with it relative to it. So this lays on the floor and we could rotate this. Scale won't behave because that's how parent constraints work. But now basically our spine here, the very first bone in all of our system, the root control, is constrained to this. So when I move the root control, it will move everything underneath of this in the hierarchy. So we can sort of use this as a clever way to begin to sort of layer on controls and drive different bones without actually parenting up in the hierarchy. Because again, as we build this out here, and we'll see this in just a moment, it's going to start to get complicated very quickly, and we want to instead seed our connections with constraints instead of using parenting or even like the connection editor. Because this is where my excels, right? These constraints will basically be sort of the lifeblood of our rig. So next up, what we're going to do is, after making our root control, we're just going to make some spine controls. And if you want to get fancy with it, you can grab another curve in here and maybe grab a circle. But I just want to grab a typical nerve circle for this. So again, it doesn't have to be a curve from our rigging script. You can also go in here to grab these circles. Wouldn't recommend the square, because I believe the square is made in a strange way. Yeah, it's a group that's just 4 lines. And I don't really want that. So I'm just going to grab a curve in here instead. And again, I want to scale this up because this is way too small. This is going to be our first spine 1 control, so I'm going to scale it up. Maybe get it to the size that I want it to be. So the goal that I want to do is that I want to align this straight up against the spine. I don't want it to 100% be aligned with the spine because I want this to sort of like hula hoop style surround the girl. Like I don't want it to be set back a little bit. I want our controls to look nice and organized. So I'll toggle that off again for now, but be thinking about that, and I'll show you how to do this here. And I will do that by, instead of using X like we had used previously to snap to the grid, we'll use V as in victory. And this will allow us to sort of snap things to vertices or to points, and those points are inside these bones, right? So we can do that. But I just want this height, again, to be at the level of my spine 1 control. Oops. So I will grab my NURB circle, hold in V as in Victor, and just grab the y-axis. So just grab the green manipulator and drag it up in space. And now it's already snapping. Now it's on my root, so I don't want that. I'll go up 1 more. But it should be the same level as my spine. So I'll frame it here on the side, and bam. That is lancing through beautifully. It's still where it needs to be in space, but is aligned with that spine. All right, So again, we want this curve to be centered around the girl, but we want the place that it rotates around to actually be controlling the bone, because that rotation would be a little off, right? Because our point of rotation in the bone is down here. And if I click on my circle, it scoots over to somewhere in empty space, and I don't want that. So what I'll instead do is I'll move the pivot of this curve. So a lot like with the bones, or even with empty groups, I'll hold down D as in dog, then I'll hold V as in Victor. Since I'm already aligned on X and Y, I just need Z. So I'm just going to grab the blue handle and then drag it back until it is smack dab in the middle of that joint. Perfect. So now while the actual curve, this NURB circle, remains in that spot in space, the pivot point that it's rotating around will be relative to the bone. So our controls will work properly. They won't be a little bit off once we constrain this up. Now, let's go ahead and rename our curve. This is going to be our spine 1 control. So I'll name this spine 1 underscore CTL. And before we go any further, let's make sure we freeze our transformations because we want this to be the 0 spot, right? We have a bunch of junk over here that we don't want. So go up to Modify Freeze Transformations again to 0 that out. And similarly, we also want to put this in an empty group and rename it. So I'll hit Control G on top of the spine 1, go to Group, and I'll rename it similarly spine 1 underscore lowercase CTL underscore capital G, capital R, capital P for our group. So now that we've got this group ready, we do want that pivot to be in the same place. So we can get this up here in a couple of different ways. I could hold D as in dog, right, and do the same thing to snap it over. We can also get it close to ballpark it at least by going up to Modify Center Pivot, so it's a little bit closer. But what I'll do is I'll hit D as in dog again, hit V as in victory, and make sure that this is snapped to where it needs to be, and do the same back in Z. So our rotate for the empty group, or our pivot for the empty group and the spine should be identical. And we're starting to see some of that tree hierarchy, that stair step. And again, this is going to be super important as we begin to build this. So I want to sort of build this in a hierarchical manner, right? Like I want to start mirroring sort of what's going on with our spines, but we make it easier with some control curves. So I'm going to grab my group, not my curve, my group, hold it on middle mouse, drag it up so there's this box surrounding the root control. Again, I don't want the dividing line because this will just move it in the hierarchy. I want this to be a child of the root control. So we'll hold middle mouse, drag it up there, and do that. And again, you could control click this and hit P as in parent to also put that in there. But this is what I'm looking for in our rigs specifically. So when you turn your assignments in, I'm looking for this empty group followed by the curve, followed by the empty group, followed by the curve, and this is going to continue to work its way down as we build a hierarchy. This is what I want daisy chain-wise. Again, I don't want a group to a group, so this would be incorrect, or a curve to a curve, so this would also be incorrect. I need this stair-step shape, this daisy chain. This is really, really important for setting up your rig, so you want to make sure that this is correct and double-check it before you go much further. And we'll constrain this up here in just a moment. But again, I'm looking for that shape. Having our empty groups hold those control transforms is definitely what we're looking for. And this helps us keep our rig clean as well as give us some little offsets if we ever need to tweak anything later. So again, this is the sort of hierarchy style that I'm looking for. Please make sure that your rigs are set up like this. All right, so next we're going to constrain this to the joint. This is pretty easy. This is like what we did with our root curve, but we're just going to go further up the spine. So again, the parent constrains the child. So I want to select my curve, and if you grab it through the outliner, make sure you grab the curve, not the group, but the curve. Shift select the spine 1, which is the child here that we want our control curve here to drive. And once again, we'll go up to constrain, parent, and do make sure maintain offset is checked. Boom, boom, hit that. Now let's go ahead and test our rotation. I'll select my curve, hit E to go to my rotate tool, and yeah, all right, this is working. So notice that it's just constrained to only one joint, but because this is a hierarchy style connection, it will affect everything above it. And the reason that we put this in this hierarchy, right, is so if we grab our root control, we'll also grab the spine control underneath of it. So I can move my root control and begin to adjust this curve as well and will still move relative to the root control. So again, simple hierarchy stuff, but this is really important for getting a good rig together. And we'll be sort of daisy chaining all the way up to the neck as well to make sure that this is doing all that it is supposed to. So, let's see here. Let me undo. Make sure that this is zeroed out because I had some extra values over here. I don't want that junk in. Even step forward because I thought this was correct, but there's actually some junk data here. So I just undid. I do want to make sure everything is zeroed out on your controls before you begin to constrain things. And still working. So let's go ahead and replicate what we did here with our spine and just move it up for spine 2. So again, let's duplicate spine 1 with a Control D command. I believe you can also go up to edit duplicate. Yep. But I'd rather much use Control D because it's a little bit faster. Let's go ahead and rename both of our groups and control curves. So we'll make this spine 1 instead of spine 2. And same goes for this curve down here. Set up. And let's get this moved to the next one up. So similarly before, I'm going to do this by having the group drive this at first because it should move my spine control as well. Hold down V as in victory. Grab this green arrow to move it up on just the Y so it snaps. If we move in here, because our spine is not directly above it, we're going to want to move our pivot over, but we still want these curves stacked on top of each other, right? So this maintains visually nice, but we can change the pivot to ensure that the rotation is working as it should. But again, that's what we want to be thinking about when we're planning our rig, is to make this look nice as well and as usable as possible. So I'll hold down D as in dog and hold down V as in Victor to snap this back into place on not just the curve, right, but also the group as well. Hold V, do it that. It's looking like how I want it to be. So our pivots are in the exact same place. And let's go ahead and move this in the hierarchy again. Now notice I do have some junk here, so I'm going to want to freeze my rotations or freeze my transformations rather in just a moment. But I'm going to go up here to spine 1, middle mouse drag it, and bam. Again, we're getting this daisy chain where it's empty group, curve, empty group, curve, empty group, curve. So we don't want that to be altered in any way. That is the hierarchy shape that we're looking for. So before I begin to constrain this in the next control, I'll modify freeze transforms on my group. We could have also moved up the spine and then moved the group with it. We just would have had to freeze the spine instead of the group if we just want to move the spine up and then have the group's pivot play catch up. But again, all this is zeroed out over here. Oops. So both my group and my curve are zeroed out. My pivot is in the right place, so the spine will bend and rotate correctly. Let's go ahead and add another parent constraint. So I'll select my curve, shift select the spine that it needs to be constrained to. Again, the parent constrains the child, so we grab the parent first and then the child. Go up to constrain, parent. I know maintain offset is still checked on in my settings, so I don't need to double check that. But if anything does budge or move and get weird, it's probably because you didn't have maintain offset. So I'll select my spine too, change my rotate tool, and looks like everything is still functional. Grand. So again, testing our hierarchy out, now we can move our root control. Grab our spine 1 control that should rotate the spine 2 control, which it does, and grab the spine 2 control and rotate it, and it alters the hierarchy of the bones above it. So this is sort of the basis of rigging, right? Is that we create a hierarchy of controls that mimics the hierarchy of our spines and our bones and our joints, and use constraints for the curves to drive that control. Because we don't necessarily want to transform the bones. They're holding the transforms from my rotate, right? And we just want that to instead be what drives our movement. Because again, we're designing something for animators to use that'll be nice and easy to implement in their work, not trying to make this so it's difficult and they have to go in and grab bones individually to do so. So I'll actually hit V to make sure that this is still around the same size that I want it to be. And this is fine for now. I might scale down the next one just to make it a little more usable. So let's go ahead and do that. So in a similar way, I'm going to duplicate my spine 2. Let's rename it to spine 3. Hit delete, change this to a 3. change my spine to control, spine 3. And I'll turn this off so this doesn't mess up my alignment. I'll grab my group. Actually, I'll grab the curve this time just to show that we can do this multiple ways. Hold down V as in Victor. Grab my Y first so I can just get this up here. Because again, I don't want this to move back the actual curve because now this is out of alignment and that's not easy on the eyes. Let's see here. I'll actually scale it down here now before I move the pivot just to make sure. So I'll grab this and just scale it down so it's a little more around her shoulder size for this here upper spine into the neck control. So I'm okay with that size. I'll hit V again so this vanishes. I'll move my spine pivot back by hitting D as in dog and holding down V as in Victor and scooting this back. And I'll do the same with the pivot of the group. So both the curve and the group, I want to move those pivots to be in the same place. So again, hit D to get the pivot, hold V as in Victor to grab it on Y, and then use Z to push it back in space. So we don't want this wiggling on X, we just want this to be on the origin since we've been working from the origin the entire time. All right, same sort of deal. I'll go ahead and parent this up. I'll even control click above it and hit P. We have that stair step hierarchy. It hasn't been compromised at all. We do have our spine have some junk transformations. So again, we want to modify freeze transformations. And now that everything's looking good, let's again constrain it. So again, grab the parent, grab the child, and go up to constrain, parent. So again, double check to make sure that that rotates everything above it. Nothing below it is moving. All of our control curves should affect things above them in our hierarchical style manner. So this is how our rig is being built slowly but surely. And again, make sure that we're getting this daisy chain alternation. You don't want to constrain the group to the bone. You want to constrain the curve to the bone. So this will actually work when they grab the curve to manipulate the rig. And lastly, I'll bring up the rear by replicating this step with just the neck. So duplicate again with Control D. Instead of this being spine 3, I'll just name this, neck underscore CTL underscore group GRP, and make our actual control curve neck underscore CTL. Now I'll use the group instead this time to go ahead and move everything up to the appropriate level. Hit V as in Victor, grab the Y just so I can move this up. Oops, come on. Strange. It's not letting me snap up. So let's see if I can do this from the other side. There we go. So again, if you're not getting snap to work, just try a different view and that may work. I probably was just messing something up there, but that's how I found the solution. So again, D as in dog, and hold down V as in Victor with this pivot selected to get it back in place. Tap it again. And let's move the pivot of not only the group, but the neck with it as well. All right, come on. There we go. So again, that is in the dead center where I need it to be. Actually double checking, it's got aligned to something. So yeah, do keep that in mind. This might be the instance where it might have been easier to align the curve first and then have the group play catch up. But either way, both of these pivots are in the exact same place. We have some rogue transforms here, so we'll freeze them here again. Modify freeze transformations. And actually, again, I probably want to size this down as well. So once I unhide this, I'll scale this down so it's a little more appropriately sized to her neck. Cool. And similarly, I want to modify freeze transformations so there are no extra transformations here. Again, that's what we're looking for. Lastly, I'll put this in the hierarchy where it belongs. Use middle mouse to parent it up. And next we're going to be parent constraining this. So again, the parent constrains the child. We want this here to constrain to our neck bone. And then we'll go up to constrain, parent one last time. Okay, so again, let's test out our rig. I'll grab my move tool after grabbing the root. So I can scoot the root forward. I can rotate my spine. It's affecting the bones underneath of it as well as the control curves. So we make it a lot easier for our animators to work with the control curves. Get them rotated up like so. And it looks like everything is working. And again, this is where having this hierarchy here works out for us, is because I can shift select everything. I can grab down here and zero it out, and everything will be back to its resting position. So that's why we did this with our controls instead of our groups here, because one, we couldn't even change them if we wanted to, because the joints themselves are constrained, but they also do have translate values on them that would mess them up if this were set to 0, right? Because that would go back to the center of the bone. Definitely don't do that, don't mess with that. I just wanted to show off that's why we're using these control curves instead, because it makes it a lot easier for our animators to simply have things zeroed out. So that is how you get some basic control set up. Again, we just laid out the spine. First, we then got our organization cleaned up, got our display layer set up, got our joints laid out, cleaned them up, oriented them. Then we started building those control curves. Again, when we build these curves, we want to get them to the size that we want them to, get them positioned where they need to be in the world, and then freeze their transformations, because we don't want those extra transformations to mess up things when we need to zero it out. We want that daisy chain style tree in the outliner. So this is the hierarchy that we want, alternating between control curve and empty group. So group curve, group curve, group curve, all the way down. And then again, yeah, just make sure everything is sized up correctly. If these were all giant hoops, it probably wouldn't make a lot of sense, because if this was a giant hoop up against, just her neck, that would probably get in the way of some facial controls and other things like that. So that's how we want to be thinking about planning our rig in a way that makes sense to people who use it and also to ourselves. So that's all for this. I believe when the time comes, you'll have an assignment that is to basically recreate what we did here on the female geo with the male geo at home, and that will be your homework. I'll assign that to you when the time is right, so don't worry about it for now. Be keeping an eye out on Blackboard. But that's all I have for you. So I hope this was helpful. As always, please ask me if you have any questions or hit me up if there's some issue. But that's all I have for you.